Hello everyone and welcome to the latest episode of Sean's Movie Crusades. My name's Sean Waskrug and I'm here to review the latest movies out in theaters, as well as movies that have come out in the past year, as well as any you guys recommend, whether they be recent or old school movies. If you guys do have any recommendations of movies you would like to have reviewed on the show, feel free to leave a comment on the video below, or leave a comment on Sean's Movie Crusades on Facebook. And don't forget to give this video a like, share, and subscribe. And don't forget to do that over on Facebook as well, so we keep you up to date with the latest movie news. Today I'm reviewing a back-to-back double feature of documentaries, two of probably the most critically acclaimed documentaries of the year so far, in Three Identical Strangers and Won't You Be My Neighbor. Both are very different. I mean, they're definitely two different sides of the spectrum in terms of documentaries, so they were kind of weird to watch back-to-back, but I heard so much about both these documentaries. I'm not a big documentary guy. I mean, I watch, like, the occasional ESPN about a pro wrestler or something that happened in sports, but I'm not someone that really goes out and searches for documentaries to watch, just because more times than not, they just don't, unless they're really, really interesting, I'm not really fully intrigued by them. I'd much rather just watch an actual movie instead. But these two in particular I heard so much about. Mainly Won't You Be My Neighbor, which is the Mr. Rogers documentary. I've heard, one of the best movies of the year. It's the movie that we need right now. It's incredibly heartfelt. You'll cry when you watch it, and all this kind of stuff. So it really intrigued me to see this movie, or see this particular documentary. And then on the opposite side of the spectrum, Three Identical Strangers, I heard very little about. It was just that you had to see it, and you had the kind of the basis of what the story is generally about, but then it's not quite what you seem. Don't spoil it. Just go into it. I mean, it's just a very mysterious kind of documentary that everyone just kept talking about, saying, hey, you need to see this, but I can't tell you anything about it. So, we'll start off with that one first. So with Three Identical Strangers, you're right. It's a very unique story. It's hard to hear sometimes. Story. It starts off one way, and it completely just goes a different direction with it. And it's not all good. And not the documentary. The documentary's great, mind you. I'm talking about the story. What that happens with these people. Basically, the story follows these three guys. There's I'm gonna blank on their last names because they're three different names. But you got Eddie, David, and Bobby. And I believe David goes to his first day in college, and they're all in New York. And he's walking through a campus, and it's his first day, and he doesn't know anybody, but everyone keeps coming up to him and, greeting him like an old friend, like they've all seen before, and they all know him, and stuff like that. And he's real confused and doesn't really understand why everyone's talking to him like that, and why everyone talks to him like they know him. And then finally, someone comes up to him who knows who he is, and goes, I need you to come with me right now. You have a twin. So naturally, this guy and David, they go and they call up Eddie, and they go, hey, I think I'm your twin. And then they drive over to Eddie's house, and sure enough, yeah, there are identical twins. They look alike, they sound alike, and it's just this crazy happenstance and basically Eddie had gone to that school the year previously and had decided not to go again this year, so that's how everyone at the college knew who he was. And it was just kind of this creepy situation, and they kind of became a huge media story in the newspapers. And then all of a sudden, Bobby is at home and he reads the newspaper, and all of a sudden he realizes that's me in that newspaper. There's two of me. Holy crap! I am a triplet. And then he contacts Eddie and David and says, hey, I look like you too. And then it's a huge media story, and they become, basically, they basically become icons, in a sense. Before reality TV and all that stuff, if it had been today, there probably would have been a reality TV show based on them. But basically, they become the triplets, and they're on every talk show, they're on every newspaper in the U.S. and they just become celebrities overnight about these three people who have never who were separated at birth, and then 19 years later they all three somehow come together, and they act the same, they talk the same, and they repeat this so many times in the documentary. They smoke the same cigarettes, they like the same women, and blah blah blah. That got very, very tedious by the end of the film. They kept repeating that, but it's a unique story, and then they eventually get they get an apartment together, and they all party together, and they eventually go into business together and stuff like that. But it seems kind of like just oh cool, that's a great story. They're triplets, they found each other, they become best friends, happy ending. No, that's not a happy ending, because there's this strange, insane understory about how they got separated in the first place, and the reasoning for them being separated. And I'm not going to jump into it, because like the people who had told me said, we're not going to spoil this for you. Now, yes, you could easily go look it up on the internet, and you could read about it, and there's your spoiler right there, because it's a true story. So it's not like any other movie where I'd be spoiling the movie, but it's one of those where it's like, if you want to see the movie, if you want to not know what's going on right from the get-go, don't read it. Just find this documentary. It's called Three Identical Strangers, and it's a worthy watch. It's insane what happens to these three guys throughout their lives, and it kind of also brings up a lot of debate on certain aspects that I can't say because of it being a spoiler to the actual documentary. But it's one of those things where it's like, it's right, but it's also wrong. And then how do you fix this? Because either way is still wrong in a sense. And it's a very unique story. And you can kind of tell something happens to one of the twins right off the bat, because the third twin, or the third triplet, never shows up on camera present day. So something happens with the third triplet. I'm not going to say on here, but when the movie starts, or the documentary starts, and they introduce you to two of them in present day, and they don't ever show the third one, you kind of have a good idea of what's going on. But yeah, it's a recommendation. I mean, it's just a really interesting story, and it ends kind of open-ended. So I mean, you could probably look it up and find out what happens after the movie, because it's a documentary. They're not really going to do sequels or anything like that. But it's a really unique documentary. It's really good, and it actually is kind of horrifying in a sense of what happened to these triplets and how their life progressed because of what certain people did. But it's definitely a recommendation. Now, to the other one, which is Won't You Be My Neighbor, from the Mr. Rogers Neighborhood. Basically, it's a full-on biography documentary, basically, about Mr. Rogers. Now, I grew up, I mean, Mr. Rogers was around. I caught a few episodes here and there as a child, but I mean, I was more focused on, Reading Rainbow, Barney, Lamb Chop. But I mean, Mr. Rogers was always around, but it was just, I preferred, I guess, looking at, stuffed dinosaurs and a talking sock that looks like a lamb, or Reading Rainbow. It's just a guy talking about books, but I was more in tune with that, and I mean, while Mr. Rogers was around and I would see him from time to time, I wasn't really all that into him as a child, but this story kind of makes me wish I was. It's a beautiful story. It's amazing the life that Mr. Rogers lived, and how much of a trailblazer and badass that this guy was, because he basically kind of started when TV started. He was going to become was a preacher. I could be wrong on that, but I mean, he was gonna have his life through the church. But then, before he joined, he saw television for the first time, and he was like, I could probably get out there and reach the word to everybody better by doing television than by going into the church. And so he decides to go that route, and then he kind of starts seeing how television was back then, which is a lot like it is today. It's just a bunch of, I mean, it is better than today than it was back then, but it was just more like people throwing pies in each other's faces and marketing, and there was not really any real essence or meat to any of the stories that were being told. And he was like, well, someone needs to be able to tell, not stories, but someone needs to be able to go on there and be educational to children. And because all the children's shows were garbage back then. And so he, with the lowest of budgets, basically puts on these little stories with puppets. And each puppet was very special to him. And were a part of him, in a sense, and a part of people that he knew. Mainly also Daniel the Tiger, which a lot, you find out through the documentary, is basically Mr. Rogers himself, talking through the puppet. And that's kind of how he got himself out there, is by talking through Daniel the Tiger. And some of the scenes that they showed in this documentary of him and this is on his show, but obviously this was like in the 60s and 70s, and a lot of people didn't really see these. But like there's one particular episode where he's talking. It's about the Bobby Kennedy assassination, and he is talking to what's her name? She's the main female on the show who talks to all the puppets. It's Lady Amberlin. She is talking to Daniel the Tiger, and Daniel goes, blow up this bubble or this balloon for me. And then he goes, what's assassination? And just the look of Lady Amberlin's face as she's just like, oh crap. Even today, I'm just like, oh wow, they're gonna go for this. Like, they're not gonna hold back. And that's kind of what the amazingness of, and I'm saying that wrong, of Mr. Rogers, is that he didn't care what people thought. I mean, he did, but it was one of those things where it's like, if he felt it needed to be told to children, and that children needed to be not lectured, but if they needed to be educational, they needed the education on the subject, he didn't hold back. I mean, he would do themes about death, so kids understood death, divorce, if you ever got lost, like certain things that, like, in certain TV shows now, like, hey, we don't want to say that to kids, that's going to scare kids, parents aren't going to like that. Mr. Rogers didn't care. He back when, I mean, it still is today, but I mean, back when African Americans and white people were heavy at it, he had a character who was an African American who was a police officer, which back then, I mean, still today, was a scary profession for a lot of African Americans. And he had this guy play a cop on the show, and he treated him with the utmost respect, and he kind of blended the color barrier together to kind of show that it's not bad to have friends of different colors. It's not wrong to have people that are different on the show, and he did it in such a beautiful way that it was soft and somber and just made a whole lot of sense. And he got a lot of crap for it. I mean, people continually, because Mr. Rogers was so different and unique, he got thrown through the mud a lot. I mean, there was people who questioned his sexuality. There were people who said that he's the reason why children are so not children, but children growing up and becoming adults are so I'm special and I deserve this and I deserve this, because Russ Rogers said they were special, and that he's the reason why the generation is these generations of kids growing up are so crummy, is because they all think that they're special and they're not. And people also came up with, saying that, oh, he was a former Navy SEAL who killed a bunch of children. He has tattoos all over his body, and that's why he wears the sweaters and stuff like that. And so, I mean, he got thrown through the mud a lot, but it never, I mean, it bothered him, but he never let it show. And he kind of came out with it, and he's just like, if they came at him with one thing, he would have a show that, without directly just pointing to the camera going, I didn't do this, he would just do his own thing, and you could tell it was kind of a little nod to the hat, going, hey, I hear you, I see what you're saying about me, it ain't true, but I'm going to make you guys listen to me anyway. And he would do it in such an amazing way. I mean, there's this one, and interview with this anchor, and he comes right out right from the beginning. He goes, "I don't mean no disrespect, but," he goes, "Are you square?" Which back then I'm assuming is "Are you gay?" And then all of a sudden, Mr. Rogers pulls out Daniel the Tiger and starts talking to the guy as Daniel the Tiger, and the guy just zeroes in on Daniel the Tiger, and it's like he's a child again. And then Mr. Rogers takes Daniel the Tiger and puts him away, and the anchor's just like, almost like he was in a trance. He was just like, wow. And that's kind of what Mr. Rogers was like. And even with the African American cop, where's his real name? I have it written down here somewhere. Francois or Francis. I mean, it's French. Clemens. He not only was he an African American playing a cop on his show, but he was also gay. And I mean, when and paparazzi saw him in a gay club, and they tried to throw it through the dirt of Mr. Rogers. And at the time, Mr. Rogers was, like, hey, don't go out there anymore. If you do come out, I can't have you on the show. And that's because they would have lost all their sponsors. But after a couple years, he finally adapted, and it became okay for him. And he had him on the show again, and he did this song or rendition about, how he loves him just for the way he is. And this guy saw Mr. Rogers as like a father figure to him. And it's a beautiful story, and it's just, this guy was just an amazing guy. He was so heartfelt. And one of the main things for Mr. Rogers was that we have nothing but time and patience. And he would do this one thing where he's like, let's see how long a minute lasts. And he goes, I want you to think about this one person who's important to you, who's been there for you, and has done all this kind of stuff, and I just want you to think about them for a minute. And then it would just go a whole minute of silence. And he felt like it is a very beautiful scene. And he never felt like he had a rush to get his words out. I mean, there'd be times where he would talk, and he would just be quiet, and he would just listen. And then he would talk again. It's just like he didn't care about dead air, where a lot of shows are like, we need something, we need noise, we need someone to talk. He had no problem just letting that dead air sink into his shows, and letting whatever they were talking about, or the person he was interviewing, or the situation that the show was being about, just breathe. And you don't see that much anymore. And I mean, even to the point where back then, Congress was going to cancel PBS because they needed $20 million to keep the channel going, and the politicians at the time, I mean, one in particular, and I'm blanking on his name, he was just like, no, this is stupid, I'm going to use it. It was mainly Nixon, but it was the guy working for Nixon. He's like, I'm not going to do this. He goes, this is stupid, we need money for other things, I'm not going to give it to him. And he had a big hearing, and all these people from PBS came and talked, and they kept getting batted away, and then Mr. Rogers comes up, and he just tells a beautiful story about children and why it's important for what he does. And basically, by the end of that, like 2 to 5 minute conversation that Rogers has with this guy at this hearing, the guy goes, "Okay, you have your $20 million." And that's just how powerful of a person Mr. Rogers really was. And it's like I said, it's an amazing documentary. I can't recommend it enough. I could literally just keep talking about it, because there's so much amazing things that happen in the documentary. His children, his wife, his friends, his crew members, they all have moments to talk in the documentary about Mr. Rogers. There's tons of great scenes they show. They even go into some certain areas that are a little dark, such as near the end of Mr. Rogers' life, he was starting to become not jaded, but it's just with the way the world was, especially around 9/11, where he just felt like he wasn't able to help anymore. But then they pushed him, and he was the voice that everyone needed to hear, and that's probably something that we needed to hear today, because there is no one like Mr. Rogers. I mean, there's probably people out there that want to be, or that try to be, but the way the world is today, they get beat down, and they get jaded because of it, because of how they get talked to and how they get treated. And that was one thing with Mr. Rogers, is he had such a strong support system, and he is so strong in his beliefs of how he should be treated and how everyone should be treated around him and how he should talk to not just adults but children, that it never let him waver. And especially around today, with the way news is and the way people talk to everybody, it would be amazing to see what he would do today if he was still around. But I could not recommend a movie more to watch. I mean, I know documentaries can be a little dull and boring, but this is a must-watch. I would say it's one of the best movies of the year. Now, when I do my top 10 movies of the year later, this will get an honorable mention because it is a documentary, and so I won't have it ranked with my top 10 movies. But it's definitely at the top of the list. It is a must-watch for anybody. I don't care if you're a fan of Mr. Rogers or not. This is definitely something you guys should find time to watch. It's already out on Blu-ray, and I'm sure it'll be on streaming services here soon if it isn't already. It came out back in September, so there's no excuse. It's not in my theater. You need to go see this movie. You need to watch this movie, and just enjoy it. And if you cry, cry. You know, it's an amazing movie, and it needs to be seen. And I guess that's all I really have to say about that. So two really good documentaries, totally different sides of the spectrum for both. I recommend both, but definitely Won't You Be My Neighbor is a highlight and needs to be seen by everybody. And that's about it. And I hope you guys enjoyed the reviews. I hope you got something out of it. And if you guys want to leave any messages, whether it be other movies you would like to have reviewed, or if you want to talk about the two documentaries that I just talked about, feel free to leave a comment down below, or you can comment on Sean's Movie Crusades on Facebook. And like I said, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to the channel so you're kept up to date with the latest movie reviews. And there's going to be a lot coming down the pipe. I'm kind of going back now and trying to watch a lot of the movies that I hadn't got to see this year. So there's going to be a lot of reviews for movies that have been out for quite a while in terms of, like, you know, they're already released on, you know, Blu-ray, streaming, and stuff like that. But I just didn't get around to seeing them this year. So I'm trying to catch up now and doing it. So you're going to be seeing a lot more reviews of movies that aren't in theaters currently. So be ready for those. And, yeah, that's basically it. And in case I don't see you, good morning, good afternoon, and good night, Movie Crusaders.